I will try to bring the idea of a modernity in explaining the movement, Gülen movement. And before doing this, let me clarify why I have chosen this keyword. While reading some texts written by Gülen, I have recognized that I can't understand them. Or in other words, they are simply meaningless from a modernist perspective. So I try to understand why or what is the alternative meaning behind these things. This brought me to a kind of comparative reading between Gülen and the canons of Islamic philosophy, such as Abu Hamid al-Ghazali and other stuff. So I discovered that just like many of the canons of Islamic philosophy, Gülen also is employing a different, let's say, linguistic methodology. This brought me to the idea of a modernity. So I argue that in explaining the Gülen movement in terms of how it employs different structures, because when we talk this movement, we mean that it's operating around the globe, which means that we are living in the era of nation states. We have boundaries, different borders that separates nations from each other, but it is still operating in different countries such as Macedonia, Madagascar, Nigeria. So the first question is how it is possible, how it is effective in such a boundary-based modern state system. The second question is, again, about the idea of a modern, how some non-material ideas such as legitimacy, knowledge, and epistemologic forms are being produced. I argue that the study of the Hizmet movement or the Gülen movement from the perspective of a modernity can help us to understand why it is operational in such different environments, how it is coping with the idea of modern. The problem about a modern networks of Islam is they were rejected by the modernized elites of Islamic world. So in many Islamic states, including Turkey, we have these radical modernization agendas. So the elites came up with the idea that we no longer recognize them. It was a kind of official rejection, which doesn't necessarily mean that their rejection entailed that they were no longer practically effective. But in the Gülen case, while analyzing how such a movement can be operational in different societies, even though they are, they are separated according to modern boundaries, I find out that the movement operates mainly through these amodern networks. So these modern networks actually is an operational corridor for the movement. Second, they are also a kind of source of security and legitimacy. At this point, I think it is better to ask how does Gülen approach to modernity in general? As I represent him as the representative of a modernity, first of all, there is no direct rejection of modernity, but it is a kind of negotiating with modernity. Negotiation refers that it is not only moral-based criticism. I find out several facts to explain how the modern networks are being employed by the movement, but in the interest of time, I am just focusing 4 of them. The first is security. As we all know, since Bauman, modernity is about these boundaries. The modern notion of security is about these institutions and boundaries. In other words, modernity has an obsessed idea of security which is very linked with the institutional aspect. So it means that the lexicon of modernity is to a large extent defined according to government, state, territory, homeland, so on and so forth. But in this case, the movement, while it acts not according to these prioritized and highly critical boundaries, but through daily life, the movement is never seen as a threat to modernity, which is something very good. It's not risking, but on the other hand, it creates its own security mechanism. Because since it is indifferent to modernity, when you read, for example, Gülen, such institutional aspects as city, civilization, state is never appreciated. It is quite important. We know many Islamic scholars who do not pay attention to the idea of state, but most of them appreciate city and civilization. But in Gülen, interestingly, even such institutional things are not appreciated. In other words, in Gülen's thought, these institutional aspects of modernity, I'm keeping city and civilization far from this, are seeing things without ontological nature. So when the movement operates out of these areas, the mechanism of modernity to see it as a kind of security threat is not working. This is something good. The second point is, modern networks protect the movement from nationalist reaction. For example, from a Turkish perspective, it is very difficult to explain why this movement is very, very successful in Kurdistan regional government. Because the political atmosphere in Turkey, I mean, including some parts of Turkey, is very, very sensitive about this case. But the movement is very, very, very successful in Kurdish regional government area. I may give some other examples as well. The answer is very, 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 from this perspective, clear. The movement, by again employing these traditional networks, never employs nationalistic discourse. I should refer here to Muhammad Ayoub's findings that many Islamic movements are in fact nationalist movements, because they are either product of anti-nationalist struggle or so on and so forth. But when you make a comparative study, you will find out that in many Islamic movements, there is the idea of creating an Islamic state, or at least mainly because of the legacy of colonial rule, the idealism of having our own state, but which means another aspect of modernization. So in this case, by acting through these traditional modern operational corridors, the movement is not seen as a representative of a certain nationalistic discourse. That is why there are serious problems between Turks and Kurds, the movement is highly successful in Kurdistan. And the third point is, I should also talk about how a modern network sustains legitimacy to the movement. Because if a network sustains a legitimacy, its members has it in the same way. And again, these networks do not represent the representative of the movement. Let me say it functionary, or the agent of the Gülen movement. Imagine yourself as the agent of the Gülen movement in Madagascar. You are going to face a community, you don't know, no idea about their culture, so there's a problem of being stranger. Why these people are not seen as stranger? Because, as we know, since again Bauman, modernity, while creating its boundaries, creates the idea of strangers as the dominant category to understand other. So how come the functionaries or the agents of the movement are not seen as strangers? It is mainly these modern network, especially among Islamic community, so they are being seen another representative of these Islamic networks. And finally, how these final point is another sample to explain how a modern networks help the movement. It is protecting the movement from political divisions. Every society is politically divided, not only non-Western societies, even very Western societies such as Belgium, even USA. So there's a problem of protecting yourself from this politically divided society, from these controversial perspectives. So since the agent of the movement operates through daily life, it is the classroom or the market, not again referring to the institutional aspect of modernity, so political divisions also are not a clear-cut challenge to the agent of the movement. Of course, we are living in modern era, but the idea of the assumption of modernity covering all aspects of social life should be criticized. And I think the sample of Gülen is a great opportunity to analyze this, how it takes place practically.